Today we are talking about the Commander ban list, and more specifically the fast mana bans from last year. I personally think now is a good time to start opening up the conversation about potentially unbanning some of these cards. I know the last Commander ban announcement hit the community like an absolute tsunami wave, and I'd just like to remind you all that we're all still here, we all survived, the format is still going strong, stronger than ever, and it is plenty playable with or without these cards. But we have more information now. It's been a year. We've had a chance to play without the cards, see what the format's like, and looking at that information and that data, I think the fast mana bans might have actually just missed the mark. So let's get the easy stuff out of the way regarding the ban list. One, it does work, and there are plenty of cards on the ban list that everybody agrees on. The anti-cards, the racist cards, dexterity cards, the conspiracy cards. The debate on these is all settled, there's no discussion required. Same goes for the Power 9. Until WOTC can somehow reprint these in a meaningful way so everybody can afford them, they need to stay banned. Cost of entry is a vital part of keeping Commander accessible. Diving into the bans from September 2024, and it's Mana Crypt, Jeweled Lotus, Dockside, and Nardu. So let's be real for a second, nobody cares about Nardu, so he does one. The three bans were essentially banned because of game speed. The rules committee at the time wanted to slow games down to allow for more creativity and longer games. The cards themselves are essentially resource generators, and they generate the resources that you use to cast spells, mana, which is one element of speed within the game. But I'd argue the acceleration that we see in the format today is overwhelmingly driven by what most players refer to as power creep. It's the actual threats, the cards that we play, not the resource generators themselves. So let's think about this. Having those 2 free mana rocks in your deck gives you a 2.02% chance of drawing 1 out of the 99. When games are still averaging around 9 or 10 turns, or potentially even longer in the casual space as per data from EDH Rec and the Trinket made recently, this narrow advantage isn't really the game warper I think it's sometimes perceived to be. And now we have the Game Changers list. Those cards would be easily restricted to bracket 4 and 5 games. And just to clarify, the brackets weren't around at the times of banning. This is an important distinction we need to be aware of when going forward in this conversation. What feels worse to a casual player? The resource generating card that you have just played, or the card that you played from it that is now beating them down and losing them life every turn? Mana Crypt and Jeweled Lotus are resource generators. They give you the mana to cast the spells in the game, which, as I previously have mentioned, this is part of speed acceleration. But we're not ramping into the same threats that we once were. If we look back to 2011, Solemn Simulacrum, Phyrexian Metamorph, and Anger and Wonder are the top 4 rated creatures for 4 mana. Fast forward 10 years to 2021, and our top 4 creatures at that point are now Solemn Simulacrum, Beast Whisperer, Stormkiln Artist, and Pitiless Plunderer. Solemn is a commander staple, Metamorph copies creatures or artifacts, and Anger and Wonder's true value only really shine when they're in the graveyard, which is something that we can do more consistently today than back in 2011. 10 years later, in 2021, Solemn is still a commander staple, which I would attribute mostly to their inclusion within the precons throughout the last 10 years. Beast Whisper is a solid draw engine for creature decks, and Stormkiln Artist gets a temporary power buff whenever you cast instant sorcery spells and gives us mana back on those spells. And Plunderer also lets us get mana back on those creatures that we have in play via treasure tokens. Starting to see a difference over that 10-year period? If we now include cards up to 2025, Roaming Throne enters the mix, along with Mirkwood Bats. Throne being a 4 mana 4/4 with protection via Ward 2, it's all creature types, colourless, so can go in any deck, and it doubles all the triggered abilities you have of that creature type. Mirkwood Bats has flying and gives us a payoff whenever, albeit tokens, die, like Plunderer did, but this time it's damaging all of your opponent's life totals directly. And then they also trigger whenever you create those tokens as well. This last example is only a 4-year jump, and we are literally seeing a doubling in the effectiveness of creatures. You can repeat this process for 3 mana creatures, 2 mana creatures, and even 1 mana creatures, and there is a clear pattern forming. Part of this is natural progression of the game, and the other can probably be attributed to Fire Design, and what's his desire to sell packs through chase rares and mythics. But casting Crypt on turn 1 gets you the broken 3-drop on turn 2, or potentially even 4-drop a whole turn earlier. But so does Sol Ring, and going from a 1 to a 2% chance of that happening isn't really game-breaking in my mind. But when players build decks that go land, Sol Ring, Crypt, Signet, Rustic Study, that is a bit of a problem, and especially for casual games. But as previously mentioned, this was back when we didn't have the bracket system to protect the more casual game experience, and also the odds of that opening hand actually happening are beyond extremely slim. When we're talking like this as well, we're also assuming a lot of things, such as our opponents aren't going to counter, interact or remove any of the mana advantage that we have on the table, or even interact, counter and remove the threat or payoff that we cast from said mana. The priority in a Commander game shifts around the table a lot, and we shortcut it as players probably too much. And I think that's probably one of the reasons why a lot of new players feel that learning steps, phases and priority is probably one of the biggest level up moments within their Magic journey. We also have to acknowledge the casual side of Commander, and I mean like the super casual side, where people will use these resource generator cards to do something fun or creative or even just a little bit quirky. It seems to me that long gone are the days of people playing commanders that cost 6 or more mana, or even opening packs of Magic the Gathering and seeing an 8-drop in there and going, that's probably good in Commander. Like, those mana values just can't keep up with the speed of the format anymore. And while fast mana does help decks with higher mana curves to play these cards, it only serves to help other decks more and puts us firmly into where I believe the actual problem is. If the problem isn't the rocks, then what is it? Obviously I've spoke about creatures getting more powerful, but they are literally just too efficient now, and we've even seen a shift in how precons are designed and made. The Mystic Intellect precon from 2019 had an average mana value of 3.71. Compare that to the recent Jeskai precon, Counterintelligence, the average mana value is down to 3.34. Now that might not seem like a lot, but it's the difference between double spelling on turn 8 versus turn 6, which is huge in Commander. And not only that, we need to acknowledge the fact that the lower mana curve can play out the early game and develop their board state a lot more smoothly and more consistently than the higher mana curve. Simply put, we are just getting effects at 2 and 3 mana that used to cost way more. Cards like Thassa's Oracle, Underworld Breach, these vastly outweigh older alternatives like Coalition Victory, a card that's literally just been unbanned because it's an 8 mana alt win con. Thoracle is 2 mana alt win. Like, does Thoracle need a ban? No, probably not. And I don't think casual players play this card. But what is going on here? We also see this happening in standard format. Most decks at the moment have a top end of 4 mana, and cards that cost more than that tend to have an alternative casting cost, such as the Overlords or Quantum Riddler, to make sure that they can cast them earlier than turn 4. If we rewind to 2017, mono red decks were playing more 4-drops than most mid-range decks today. Back to Commander, we have the free spell problem. The zero-cost protection spells like Deflecting, Swat and Fierce Guardianship, even Flawless Maneuver. These protect your advantage on the turn that you combo off or you tap out for a massive board state. This is a bigger advantage than any mana rock ever was. Obviously, when you combine them all together, it creates a deadly deck. So now let's talk about resource management. And if you've ever played like an RTS game, you'll understand these concepts here. If I spend the early turns excessively gathering resources, tapping out for mana rocks, and don't develop my board, I am completely exposed. And if you see a player doing this, you should 100% attack them before they get a chance to use all of those resources, or keep interaction available in your hand and be patient. If I then finally try to leverage the value of all those resources to resolve a threat that maybe is a few tiers higher than anything else on the board, you should 100% remove that threat immediately to negate any advantage that that player is trying to accumulate, even if that's the only permanent they will have in play besides the Mana Rocks. Because of this, I think Jeweled Lotus is probably safe to be unbanned right now. It's a one-time effect that dumps mana to specifically cast your commander, and then it's gone. I'm not going to go into reanimation combos. Mana Crypt is trickier, because it sticks around and generates colourless mana, often enabling another big play on the following turn, but the strategy against the Crypt player then shifts to denying their other resources, like their card draw. And this is where we get into the nuance of playing Magic, and what so many players love about the game. It's deep. You can just play the cards in your hand, or you can play strategies. Think about resource management, not only your own, but also your opponent's. While we're talking about strategy, let's quickly look at that life loss mechanic on Mana Crypt, because I've seen a lot of discourse online over the last year saying that it's basically pointless because we start at 40 life. As the game naturally speeds up and threats come into play on lower and lower mana values, the life loss does indeed now matter. In higher powered games, players regularly use this type of strategy. If they know an opponent is using Ad Nauseam or Necropotence within their deck, which uses life as a resource to get more card advantage, they attack that player early and often to reduce the amount of cards that player can draw in the mid to late game. Managing resources is just a part of the Magic the Gathering game. The curve of the game is speeding up without the use of fast mana, and the RC at the time banning such a small portion of it with Jeweled Lotus and Mana Crypt, while there is still Sol Ring and a whole plethora of 0 mana artifacts, as well as the onslaught of 1 mana dorks that we get, just feels like a real drop in the ocean on the actual problem that we're facing. If we need one modern card to perfectly illustrate the efficiency problem that I'm talking about with creatures, it's Vivi Ornitier. He was released less than a year after the fast mana bans, and he literally does everything. He is a 3 mana card that damages an opponent whenever you cast a non-creature spell, gets bigger as you do so, and then also generates free mana, equal to his power. He is the entire package. He is a resource generator and a threat all on one card for 3 mana. Remember that Stormkill artist we spoke about earlier? Yeah, they ain't got nothing on Vivi. But that's not to say that you would play one over the other, but if you had to, obviously Vivi is the correct choice unless you're mono red, but you would just play them both within the same deck. And now the power level of your deck is skyrocketing without even the use of fast mana because you've built in consistency. The influx of design mistakes that we have seen with cards like Vivi and Nardu, even the One Ring and Corey Steelcutter, proves that these mistakes of broken cards are happening in the design process, and then they're making their way through all the way to print, and players just have to accept it when they come into the game. Banning Mana Rocks doesn't slow down the game at all or fix the actual problem. With all that being said, we now have a bracket system. We have a clear player-driven tool to help manage expectations of casual Commander games. At first, I thought it wouldn't really make a difference, but combined with the bans and the Game Changers list, the overall outcome is way better for the casual player. If your playgroup agrees to enter a high power bracket 4 game, why restrict the game pieces? People are making a conscious decision to enter that game space. If you want to play a casual bracket 2 game, you don't put the fast mana cards in that deck. If you are playing a fun and creative deck that needs the fast mana to operate, then you have that rule 0 conversation and get feedback from the players that you're with because you are operating outside of the rules. So in conclusion, I don't really feel like the fast mana bans had that much of an impact on the Commander game speed, as it is just naturally speeding up over time anyway, and the casual Commander experience is still relatively the same, and I think that is largely in part due to the bracket system that we now have in place. So I say, let's utilise that. So let's first look to unban Jeweled Lotus. It's a one-time effect that generates mana to just cast your commander. Obviously it could be reanimated, but once again, can only cast your commander. And then we'll see how the player base adapts, how the games evolve. Then maybe we could have a more serious conversation in another year's time about Mana Crypt. And then maybe even Dockside. Wait, not Dockside. That just gets abused too much. As I've stated here, I think the resource generating cards are less detrimental to the game than the overpowered threats we seem to be getting consistently. Let's give the players the choice and put these banned cards back into the game through the bracket and game changers list systems, and use that to manage the power and speed of games while giving clear expectations to players. For me, the solution really seems simple, but things seldom are. And the responsibility for these persistent design mistakes that consistently accelerate the format, for me, sits at the top of the company. So, to the company heads, to John Haidt, if you want to solve the root problem that this game is currently facing, you have to authorise the spending of those company resources that you have on the design and playtesting teams. Give the hard-working staff that love this game what they need to stop these broken cards from hitting print, because that will be the biggest win for the health, longevity and community of not just Commander, but the game as a whole. And it works far better than banning cards out of people's collections.